cards, get a welcome Nicola Waugh. Thank you, Nicola.
Thanks for that, Terry. Just before I start, I thought I'd open with a little bit of a story to sort of set the scene a bit. So I started my Global Focus Tour in September, October last year, and bear with me, the NFL and league supporters. I was told not to mention the rugby, but I'm a Kiwi, and we can't really resist. So the day that I arrived in Canberra was the opening ceremony for the World Cup in New Zealand, and it's a 6-week Global Focus Tour, as most of you will be aware. The Rugby World Cup is 6 weeks. So as you can imagine, the first 4 or 5 weeks there was plenty of banter between the Kiwi, lone Kiwi, and 5 Australians, 6 Australians. And I think a lot of the Australians that got involved in this banter actually didn't watch Union at all, but got involved anyway. When we got to America, the semi-final was on. That was Australia versus New Zealand. So a group of us got up at about 1 or 2 in the morning, found a pub in America that played the World Cup. You can imagine my glee at that game. It was a bit of a bittersweet game, I think. Bitter for the Australians, quite sweet for me. So yeah, no, there was a bit of background to the Global Focus Tour. Anyway, to my project. So tonight I'm just going to give a bit of background about myself and where my project sort of comes from. And then have a bit of a look at why we need to change in New Zealand, whether we should be looking at a carrot or a stick approach, some of the keys required to creating change, and then I thought I'd end on a little bit of a lighter note. Have a few stories about our Global Focus Tour, and I know there's a lot of people in here that are about to embark on the Nuffield experience, so I thought I'd offer some words of wisdom from our experience. So, this is where I'm based. So I'm based out of Hamilton. I work as a farm advisor, predominantly for dairy farmers in the Waikato, which is pretty well the whole area there. So I work for an independent company, so it's a user-paid service. About half my time is one-on-one working with farmers, looking at their business goals, both at an on-farm level and also at a higher strategic planning level, and working out where they want to go and helping them to get there. The other half of my role is more project type work, so I work with our Dairy NZ, Fonterra, our regional councils, our Ministry of Economy and Industries and various other organisations within the New Zealand dairy industry. So, as a lot of you will be aware, New Zealand is pretty similar to Australia. Agriculture and tourism are our biggest export earners, so they're quite important to our country. But over the last 10 to 15 years, we've had a big increase in the pressure on our water quality, and this is causing a lot of concern to our agriculture industry. And I guess one of the big impacts has been around the dairy sector, and there's been a lot of fingers pointed at the dairy sector. So I wanted to go and have a bit of a look at what other countries have been doing and what we could learn from these countries and implement in New Zealand. We've had a lot of national and regional discussions around setting limits around nutrient losses from agriculture into our waterways. So this is, I guess, the direction that we're looking to head. So I predominantly went to Europe and the United States on my personal studies. Coming back to New Zealand in the 1980s, this was quite an important decade in agriculture in New Zealand. This was a time when all of our government intervention was practically taken out from underneath our farmers' feet overnight. There was a lot of changes required in our agriculture industry over the next decade after that, and there are a number of farmers that didn't actually survive this period. Well, their businesses didn't survive, they survived. In the European Union during this time, they went a completely different direction, and they actually increased their amount of intervention and subsidies that they provided to their farmers. And in particular, they were going down the line of biodiversity and conservation of their environmental land. The United States was quite hard to gauge because some states were more regulated than others, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But I think during this time, it really had an impact on what the direction for our industries were. And in New Zealand, because I guess all farmers are chasing the profitability side of things, you had to be productive to be profitable. So the drive was really towards increasing productivity for these farmers during this time. In Europe, however, they still had the goal of being the most profitable that they could, but in many cases that actually meant that they would put in various other crops that weren't necessarily leading to food production, because that was the most profitable situation for them. So I guess there's a bit of a divergence here, and we've got to a point where we probably need to have a bit more of a rebalancing towards a bit of conservation. So I've covered a bit of this, but I think it's important just to really nail home the importance of this to our markets. So around the world, it's becoming more and more important for them to feel that the products that they're producing are being produced in an environmentally friendly manner. And we've had a number of organisations that have actually come to New Zealand, and one of the questions that they ask us, particularly from Europe, is what are you doing to reduce your environmental footprint? What actions are you taking to make sure that that's as small as it possibly can be? So we're having to really start, I guess, making sure that it's quite clear what our direction is. We also have quite a strong brand. We utilise a clean green brand quite frequently, and 100% New Zealand pure. I'm sure you've heard a few of those sort of terms. We have quite a safe and secure production system in New Zealand with high quality products and typically grass-fed livestock production. And we have quite a beautiful country that people like to come and visit, so it's also quite important. But this brand that we have is far from secure. Our New Zealand media is quite good at picking up bad news stories, and these go global pretty quickly. With the likes of social media and just the internet in general, most news articles will end up on the internet within a few hours or days, and this can go very, very quickly to your main markets, so that's a problem. There's also becoming more and more competition, particularly around the sustainability brand. While I was travelling, I saw quite a drive towards this. In Europe, for instance, they're actually removing their quota system, or their milk quota system, in 2015. And Ireland in particular have a national goal of increasing their milk production by 50% by 2020, and they're quite driven to get there, so that's quite a risk to us in terms of them putting more produce on the international market. I also visited Friesland Campina, one of the big milk companies in the Netherlands, and they've spent millions of dollars over the last couple of years developing a sustainable milk brand. And they're looking at producing a grass-fed milk product separately and marketing it separately, but their definition of grass-fed milk is quite different to ours. They see if half the herd's on grass for 100 days of the year for 4 hours a day is considered grass-fed milk. We would consider that grain-fed milk, but that's all right, that's their marketing. So we have to be careful that we're not stuck in this situation where we're the here and these other countries are the tortoise sneaking along behind us. So if we just go to the European Union for a minute, and just, as I've sort of mentioned, they do tend to have a lot of subsidies and use these as a way of manipulating their farmers' behaviour. So they have the single farm payment, which all farmers have a right to access, but only if they tick certain boxes. They also have a number of different agri-environmental schemes that they offer their farmers. And one example is this picture in the bottom here, where this farmer is paid a sum per hectare, depending on what the crop is, to plant this crop around his paddock of food production crop. And the goal of that is to increase bird life and insects throughout the country. Some of these incentives that they have offered do lead to market distortion though, and I just want to go into a bit of an example of one place that I went to visit. And this is also a little bit of a message to these new Nuffielders. I got the opportunity to go and visit a monastery in Germany. Now, I don't know a lot about monasteries and monks, but my impression when I got offered this, I had a perception, which was not correct, but I had a perception that they'd possibly be quite behind in their technology and would be a small little farm where they didn't really keep up with what was going on with the rest of the world. How wrong was I? This was probably one of the most forward-thinking group of people that I met on my tour. They are about 40 k's from Munich in in Bavaria. It's about an 80 hectare pocket of land, and they've got 180 monks that live there, as well as schools and various other support people that work within the monastery. They have a block of dairy, some beef, poultry and pigs, and they have a farm shop. Now their vision and goal is to be completely self-sufficient in every way that they can. So, in Germany, there's a drive to have naturally produced electricity, and they provide incentives to farmers to produce electricity through the likes of biogas. So they put in these big biodigesters. So these biodigesters are fed by all the manure that's produced by the beef section and the dairy section and the pigs and the poultry. They also grow areas of maize to feed into this biodigester, and they produce enough electricity to be able to run their whole monastery, all the school within the monastery, the church. The byproduct of a biodigester is also heat. Because it's in amongst their village, they can produce pretty well all the heat that they require to heat all the buildings in their monastery. But they're quite smart because they want to also be profitable. So they're able to sell this electricity back to the main grid for 26 euro cents a kilowatt and then buy it back in for 12. So because of this, they put this in about 4 or 5 years ago, they've been able to upgrade their dairy unit. So this is a brand new dairy unit, it had only been used for a few months. Also put on there, attached to it, a brand new rotary dairy. So it was fascinating to go and see what they're doing. And I guess it was completely against what I thought they would be doing. So any new Nuffielders, take up any opportunity you can, even if you think it may not necessarily benefit you. But one of the problems that they're having in Germany when you talk to other farmers in the country is because of the incentive that they're given to sell electricity to the grid and then buy it back cheaper, they're wanting to buy land to then grow maize. So they've got biodigesters that are solely fed maize from cropland and not actually used with any animal manures or various other things that they were wanting to try and deal with. And this has hugely increased the value of that land that can grow maize, which has then put the cost of maize up also for livestock farmers, and it's made it a lot more difficult for livestock farmers to produce meat and milk. So it's actually had quite a significant impact on other aspects of the industry. So if we now jump across to the United States, they've got a range of approaches in terms of incentives and regulations. And I spent a bit of time in California. This is the most regulated state in the US. It's just crazy. I went to visit a dairy farmer there, and he had to have 5 different permits before he even got out the door in the morning. And each of these permits had a folder about this thick, all of paperwork, all run by different boards around the industry. None of the boards talk. Some of the stuff you require in various permits contradict each other. So he was just tearing his hair out. And it's actually causing quite a problem to their industry because it's putting some of these smaller businesses out of business because they can't afford the time to spend filling in these forms to be able to literally farm, but they can't afford to employ someone to fill them in either. And in other ways, these permits are also stifling innovation, and the setup of having these various boards, which have no background in agriculture in a lot of cases, has quite an impact on the innovation in the industry. And I want to talk about one case that I went to go and see. This is also a dairy farm. I did go and see some other farms that weren't dairy farms. These case studies just happened to both be dairy. But this guy, John Fiscalini, he's a dairy farmer in California. He milks 1,500 cows and is a fantastic guy, really innovative, thinks outside the square, not afraid to take risks. He also has set up a cheese factory attached to the dairy shed, so some of the milk goes to producing cheese and some of it is sold as milk. Anyway, this guy saw or heard a lot of things that were being talked about in the industry around methane being a problem in the future, and there was the Air Board was talking about regulating methane emissions, particularly from their slurry storage. Because they're all indoor animals, they produce a lot of effluent and that gets stored in tanks, and that produces a lot of methane. So John thought, well, I've been to Europe and I've seen what they're doing there with biodigesters and things. might give it a go and see how it fits in here. So he ordered a biodigester from Europe, was busy filling in all the forms for the various permits and things he needed, and the Air Quality Board said, might solve our methane problems, but we think it produces noxious gases. So he spent 18 months fighting with the Air Quality Board to try and get this permit in. They said to him, we need some data. You have to show us that it's not going to produce noxious gases above our limit of 30 parts per million. So we got some data from Germany, I think, and they said, no, that data's German. Has to be American. And he's sort of saying, I'm one of the first ones to put this in. We don't really have any American data. So he fought for a long time, and he got a temporary permit for 30 months to put this biodigester in and run it alongside his dairy farm. One of the conditions of this being put in is it had to be collecting data every 15 seconds from this around his noxious gases. During this 18 months period that he was fluffing around with permits, the exchange rate changed. He had to pay for storage of this biodigester, and it cost him another $400,000 just to get it in the country. So he pretty much had enough at this time. Anyway, I went and visited him probably I think it was about 4 or 5 months left of his temporary permit to go, and he'd been collecting information every 15 seconds, so quite a lot of info. One of the problems that they found is that the noxious gas emissions fluctuate, effectively depending on heat. His state government had set a limit at 30 parts per million. His average was below 20 parts per million, but there's a time of the day that it goes up to, sometimes up to 50 parts per million for a short period of time. They didn't like this at all, and when I was there, he was in negotiations with them about whether he was actually going to be able to continue with the permit or not. And one of the problems was they received all the data, so they knew between 1 and 3 in the afternoon it was likely to spike above 30 parts per million. So if he continued to use it outside of his permit, they knew exactly what time to come out and test him so that he was over the limit. So he'd absolutely had enough. And he said to me, yeah, we're looking at selling up and moving to Texas. Texas is less regulated. So if you're going to buy a farm, go and buy one in Texas. But yeah, and then he was also talking about leaving the country entirely. So these sort of regulations where it's very narrow-minded could actually lead to one of the best farmers in the region leaving because he's had enough. And to me, that's quite a big problem and quite a massive loss to California. Probably a big gain to Texas, but... so if we come back to my home country, to New Zealand, there's a lot of change going to be happening in the next 10 years, whether we like it or not. Unfortunately, we don't have too much of an impact of whether it's going to come or not. So I was wanting to know how we can actually influence the process of this coming in. Talking to our farmers, they have quite a fear of what the impact of this regulation might be on their business. An increased compliance cost, whether they'll actually be productive, and there's an absolute lack of clarity around the direction of where each of our regional councils are actually heading in terms of their regulation. So our innovative farmers that are willing to take risks and give things a go are pretty scared to do that because it may turn around and have an impact on them later on when the regulation direction has become clear. So it's quite an issue at the moment. We're kind of sitting in a bit of limbo. There's also a huge range of understanding of what the issues are with farmers all around our country. And I think this sort of demonstrates things a bit. A number of you have probably seen this little model before. This is basically showing that within any population, whether it be farmers, people in town, people in another industry, within every population there's a section of people that are innovators and early adopters. They're often the leaders, they're the people prepared to take a risk, do something different, think outside the square. And then you've got the main guys in the middle. They'll watch their neighbour, wait to make sure that it works on the neighbour's farm, and then they'll try it. And then you've got the guys down the end that do things the way they've done, or they'll do things the way they do because that's the way they've always done it, and won't change unless they're made to change. So I think we need to be very careful about how we see our industry and take this into account when we're looking at any of these sort of building regulations or trying to achieve some sort of a change. And I actually think we need to be spending a lot more time earlier on looking at these guys and getting them involved in the education. And when I put incentives in there, I'm not talking about a straight per hectare dollar figure for doing something. I'm more talking about putting situations in place using funding from either industry or government to really help these guys think outside the square and help them put them into practice with lowering the risk to their business. Because at the end of the day, the farmers are the ones that actually are probably going to come up with the best solutions to this sort of stuff. You can have academics and you can have stuff happening on research farms, but it's got to work in a commercial situation. So we've got to harness these innovative and early adopters to really make sure that this is going to happen before we bring anything in. But we do need regulation to get these guys to move. So what I really think needs to happen is we need to be using those innovators and early adopters to help develop the regulation so that the regulation can then come in to get the bottom end moving and spend a lot more time at the beginning of the process trying to get it right and a lot less time in Environment Court fighting it all. So at the moment in New Zealand, we've been going down the road of collaboration, which is fantastic. Not many countries have done that, and every time I talked about this to any country, they just said good luck. So that was really encouraging. So this is a bit of a scale. We've got the policymakers at one end, our land and environment staff. They are involved in our regional councils but deal face-to-face with farmers. Various parts of industry, our rural professionals, the innovative early adopters farmers that are very involved in industry things, right down to the laggards at the other end. At the moment, we've got these guys in the middle talking really, really well. A lot of interaction going on here. Even the land and environment staff are quite involved in this process and have quite a good rapport with a lot of those innovative farmers. The problem that I see is the policymakers are sitting in their little rooms and they're not in the conversation, or not enough in the conversation. And from my experience with them, the land and environment staff, although they're part of the same organisation, have very little influence in the policymakers. So I'm trying to get the policymakers to get outside their room, talk to these innovative adaptive farmers, get a better understanding of all the issues and what the impact will be on these people's lives, because it's not just their job, it's their life, their lifestyle, their whole livelihood, so that they have a better understanding of what impact their rules and regulations may have going forward. So I've covered a lot of these already. So the keys that I think to creating change on farm are to have a combined approach. So dealing with the innovators and the early adopters differently to the laggards and having quite a clear approach and direction to deal with these guys. To have a lot more industry collaboration with those policymakers getting outside of their office and talking to farmers and various people within the industry. To road test these proposed policies with these leading innovative farmers. Get them involved in the process and get them also offering suggestions about how we can deal with this issue. But I still think we do need the regulation for the laggards, otherwise they won't change. It's just the way they are. For this to actually occur, we need the right people on the ground dealing with the farmers. We need people that have an understanding of farm systems and an understanding of the regulatory side of things, and we need enough of them, because at the moment we haven't got enough. Anyway, get on to a bit of a lighter topic. It's a bit heavy for after dinner. I had the fantastic opportunity to join in with one of the Australian Global Focus Tours. As I mentioned earlier, I was on the September-October one. This is a picture of pretty much all the group. I think Clint wasn't there at that stage, but that's right. We also had our Irish Mary Webb, maybe he was taking the photo, in there as well. But I had a fantastic group. We had an absolute blast, and probably 6 weeks of my life I'll never forget. But just to go into a bit of a range of the various things that we saw, we got to see silkworms in India. I didn't know that silk came from worms, but they do. So, funny thing was, there's this whole tray of little caterpillar worm things, and when you were quiet, they were loud enough munching those leaves that they sounded like a herd of dairy cows in a paddock. It was unbelievable, and they mowed through that whole pile of leaves within, I think, half a day or a day. They were topping it up all the time. So it was just absolutely amazing, something I would never ever have even thought of seeing. And also in India, we had a fantastic opportunity in New Delhi to go and see a charity group called Asher, and they've been set up to help educate women and children in slums. So we went and visited a slum in New Delhi and got to wander through their, don't really call them houses because they're not houses, and see how they live and actually talk to some of the kids. A lot of them actually had a bit of an understanding of English. So that was such an amazing experience and really made you appreciate how lucky I was to be born in the country that I was born in, because that could easily be any one of us right there. And their lives are definitely not as, I guess, lucky as ours are. This is another picture in India. India was a fascinating country. If you get the chance to go. We were at a buffalo farm, waiting for the time for milking. It's all on Indian time, so you never really know quite when that is. We wanted to see them swimming the buffalo through this massive swimming pool, because apparently they have to swim them through a swimming pool before they'll let down their milk. A bit strange. Anyway, the Indian guys on this farm were busy trying to shift this chaff cutter. They had it placed right at the end of a shed, so that they then chopped all this maize, and it all landed in a pile. They had to chuck it on these, a whole mat, wrap it all up, chuck it over their shoulder, walk to the other end of the barn, about 150 metres, to go and feed it to the stock. Not really too sure why they didn't just put that at the end that the stock were, but that's right. Anyway, they were struggling with this, so our group of 7 guys thought, all right, we'll give them a hand. None of the Indians spoke any English. None of the guys spoke any Indian. So you can imagine the entertainment of watching this all progress. It took about an hour and a half of trying to leverage this really heavy chaff cutter onto this patch of concrete, which was still wet. And then they finally got it on there, and then the 4 rods at either corner of the chaff cutter that they were going to bolt it down to didn't actually match. So we kind of left them to it at that point and said, oh, there you go. So, and here's old Jim and Calvin just delegating. So we were lucky enough to have Jim on our trip to India. It was quite a privilege. So getting away from India, this is in Bahrain. We had an afternoon off, so we thought we'd all go go-karting. The go-karting track was fantastic. It was right next door to the International Grand Prix track. So it was a pretty good go-karting track, and those karts went pretty quickly. We had a bit of a bet going on beforehand. Adam thought it would be a good idea. Oh, got to have a bit of banter going on, so the loser has to do something. So Adam was like, all right, loser has to do everybody's washing. I think he thought that I was going to lose. I don't think he quite knew how competitive I was at that point. Adam lost. We're still waiting for him to do our washing. So that was quite entertaining. Good luck with that. And this is back to India. A group of us went up to visit the Taj Mahal. Some of them didn't because it was about a 15-hour round trip. It was quite a long, arduous trip, but it was fantastic. So some of the guys decided to go and get a massage. That's the attire that you got to wear when you got your massage. So Adam was quite proud to wear this around the hotel for a little while. Just a few words of wisdom for these newbies out there. We went to the Ukraine, absolutely amazing country, very different to any country I've been to. We've just been to the opera, we've been cultured, as you do on Nuffield trips, you've got to be cultured. Then we went out to dinner, quite a nice restaurant, good food. Came out from dinner and there were these 2 quite attractive young ladies with these horses. I don't know about Australia, but in New Zealand, if you're taken on a horse ride, public horse ride, it's generally a half-dead, decrepit horse that's not going to do anything. But not in the Ukraine. Pretty young horses, quite frisky, and it was night time. Anyway, some of the guys thought they'd pay their money and jump on these horses, trotting down the other end of the cobblestoned road and back. Got to the turning point, I think, and Adam there's horse literally fell over sideways. Absolute scramble of horseshoes and sparks going everywhere, and this horse just falls over. Somehow Adam doesn't manage to knock himself out on the cobblestones. And the 2 attractive ladies that were leading these horses, I think were a lot more concerned about the horses than Adam. They couldn't care less. But he got back on, came back down the other end of the road. So any newbies, if you're in the Ukraine, don't ride horses on cobblestones. I just wanted to finish it off. A lot of you would have heard the story. Make sure you fully investigate your visa requirements before entering countries. I'd had a mission and a half trying to get a visa for the Ukraine, because I was travelling at the time. Looked on the Indian website, and Indian website's been quite reliable, as you can imagine. Said that New Zealanders can get a visa on arrival. So I was like, sweet, plan B, get a visa when I get there. Jumped on the plane, first country that we went to. Arrived in India about midnight after, I don't know, 16, 20 hours of travelling or something. To be told, no, there's only 4 airports in India that do a visa on arrival, and Bangalore's not one of them. So I got deported. First Nuffield scholar apparently to ever get deported. Even old Jim Gouch couldn't talk me out of that one. So they chucked me back on the plane to Singapore, had to go to another airport, catch a taxi for 6 hours to get back to that city, stay a night in a dodgy hotel, and then catch a bus down to catch up with them in Mysore. So that was a learning experience. Nuffield's all about getting outside your comfort zone. Definitely outside my comfort zone there. So I just want to thank all the New Zealand sponsors for the opportunity to go on Nuffield. It was fantastic. Learned a huge amount of different things, both about our industry, global agriculture, about myself. Also want to thank my employers, Ag First, for allowing me to have 8 months to go around the world on a junket. It was pretty fantastic. I just want to thank the Australian guys for letting me jump onto the Global Focus Tour. It's a pretty memorable trip. And yeah, so thank you for letting me come along here and tag on to this as well and catch up with everyone. So that's me, thanks.